This might be the most Sony smartphone ever. Allow me to explain. This is Pocketnow and I'm Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here are my thoughts on the Sony Xperia PRO-I. Okay, I'm not doing a specific format for this video on what might be one of the most complicated smartphones that I have ever come across. If you have followed Sony's releases over the last couple of years, you know that the brand has been leaning pretty heavily into full manual everything. And because of that, there feels like an unlimited amount of things to talk about with this smartphone. But before we get to the obvious camera-centric details, let's look at the smartphone in general. Honestly, I think Sony knows how to make a really nice smartphone. You can argue that their designs are pretty much the same every single time, but that doesn't mean that the design doesn't look good. The Pro-I continues the trend of taller displays and boxier bodies, with the frame having these defined lines that give it a bit more texture. All around the device, there's pretty much everything that you would want to ask for. The flat power button houses a fingerprint reader, and there's even a headphone jack, on top of the hardware buttons that are used for both photo and video capture. This extra circular button right here near the shutter hardware key is used to go straight to the new Video Pro mode. And finally, the matte black backing gives the phone a nice clean finish without it getting super smudgy too easily. Of course, the camera package up here is going to be the main attraction when it comes to this backing. The display is about as high quality as you can get on a smartphone, true to Sony's premium offerings over the last couple of years. What you have here is a Quad HD Plus OLED display, even though it will stick to Full HD Plus resolution for most applications. It sports high refresh rate and all of the various options that Sony puts in for color adjustments. And then powering all of this is the Snapdragon 888 and 12GB of RAM for plenty of room for all of the different apps and, let's say, games that you might be having on this phone. So really, it shouldn't be a surprise that as an everyday smartphone and a media consumption device, this is a great performer. The screen is nice and crisp, and you can hit all of the enhancements for better enjoyment in videos and games. Playing games on this high refresh rate OLED screen is awesome, and of course, Sony injects further options and features via things like audio apps, sound settings, and the PlayStation app if you want to connect it to a PlayStation. So just like with many other Xperia devices, many of Sony's sub-brands have their fingerprints all over the DNA of this smartphone, generally to great effect. Could the sheer amount of things you can do with this phone be a little bit overwhelming? Sure, but by and large, Sony does a really great job of making sure it's all generally fathomable and ultimately creates a great smartphone. But then of course we get to the cameras. Obviously Sony's alpha cameras are a huge hit, and fans have wanted them to influence the company's smartphone offerings. With the Xperia Pro-I, that might have been achieved to its greatest extent by far, for better or worse. Okay, by now you're probably familiar with how Sony approaches content creation via Pro applications. Photo Pro, accessible easily via the hardware shutter button, gives you the same types of control over settings as a typical alpha camera. For example, you can go absolutely full manual, and you can change the different lenses offered on the phone via this little toggle over here, and zoom among them for various different focal lengths. Each 12 megapixel sensor of the Pro-I starts at a specific focal length, 16, 24, and 50, and then you can zoom further from there up to a maximum of 150 millimeters. The multi-lens setup of an actual camera is what Sony is trying to emulate in this smartphone, but honestly, the results are pretty mixed. The reason why is because the sensors themselves are mixed. The main sensor is, of course, the big story here, with the 24mm lens housing a 1-inch sensor. A 1-inch sensor on a smartphone can and should be a big deal because it would mean a lot of data for the camera phone to play with. But as you might have heard from plenty of my peers, it's rather stifled because the effective lens readout actually cuts the sensor size from what it should be. See, what fans probably expected from the Xperia Pro-I is a smartphone that has the shooting experience of something like a point-and-shoot camera, like Sony's own Sony ZV-1. The ZV-1 has a 1-inch sensor, and its lens opening is actually allowing for the full sensor to be used even throughout its zoom range. But with the Pro-I, you miss out on the full capabilities of that 1-inch sensor, because when you switch to the wide angle or the telephoto, clearly they are not 1-inch sensors themselves. But back to the main sensor, you're already not using it all when the effective work area through the glass isn't even wide enough to let the whole sensor do its thing. It's a great idea, obviously not perfectly implemented, which, to be honest, has been the story for the Xperia line's cameras for quite some time now. I mean, the full manual philosophy of the Xperias has been the main example of this. Photo Pro gives you a lot of control, but let's be honest, most of the time you're probably going to put the interface in auto mode to make life a little bit easier. Cinema Pro is a whole different beast, where you're given access to different film styles for shooting, but you're supposed to plan every single shot and execute them basically in order based on the project bin that the app makes you work inside. These are workflows that pro photographers and cinematographers might be familiar with or even enjoy, but having to use them on a smartphone is just a whole different experience altogether. That's why I actually applaud Sony in including a new application that tries to bridge the gaps a little bit in Video Pro. It has a lot less of the complication of Cinema Pro, but keeps the manual approach of Photo Pro. I have all of the same basic controls here that I do on a Sony ZV-1. I can change up the video format all the way up to 4K video recording. I can even change the frame rate to 120 frames per second, which is kind of unheard of on a smartphone to have 4K at 120. And of course, we still have the dedicated focal lengths via what is more like prime lenses. You're not really zooming in any of these lenses. Instead, you're just switching from 16 to 24 to 50. And of course, after that, we have plenty of other minute controls. I did film with the Xperia PRO-I as a vlogging rig at CES, which, in that context, it made me realize that even with all of these manual controls available, I'd end up doing mostly the same thing that I did with Photo Pro. I'd go up to this top portion here and hit this auto button so that all of the settings are pretty much figured out for me, and all I have to do is hit record. Going auto mode, looks like the exposure's doing alright. We're using the vlog monitor, so I could use the rear camera of the Sony Xperia PRO-I. For the most part, being able to run and gun with a phone like this and the vlog monitor especially, it's a great time. The thing is, you're trying to give me a lot of pro settings, a lot of pro access and whatnot. I'm still hitting that auto mode and just letting the camera figure out the exposure by itself, the way I would with pretty much any other smartphone. As I mentioned in the vlog bits, I am using some of the accessories that pair really nicely with the Xperia PRO-I. What we have here is the vlogging handle, which you might have seen for a number of different Sony cameras and products that give you an access to a record button, photo button, and of course it's just really nice to have as a handle or as a tabletop tripod. After that, we have this clamp up here where the phone is actually going to go, and what you're looking to do is actually point the main cameras at yourself if you were going to hold it in this vlogging fashion. Thing is, Sony even thought about how to make this a little bit easier by providing a vlog screen. It magnetically attaches to the back here and then connects to the smartphone via USB-C. This is yet another example of a very Sony move. This whole setup is just fantastic. The vlog screen integrates really easily with the phone, providing a viewfinder to use with the main cameras. The result was one of the most fun vlogging experiences that I've actually ever had on a phone. The problem is, it's a proprietary accessory. Yeah, true to Sony fashion, a great idea introduced in one smartphone basically just lives there, and there's no word on whether or not this whole setup could actually be used in other places. Imagine if this screen could be used on any smartphone, even just any other Sony smartphone. I think Sony could sell a ton of this setup right here. But let's go ahead and talk about the quality of what I captured. I was actually pretty happy with the footage that I got. My gripes with Sony's approach here isn't to say that the hardware isn't good. The main sensor is actually a high quality performer in both photos and videos, even with the full potential of the 1-inch sensor unrealized. The problem is that the PRO-I is still limited by pretty much the same things that any smartphone has to deal with. The ultrawide and the zoom sensors dip in quality because they're simply not the same as the main sensor. And then you have the front-facing camera, which honestly is not a great performer at all. You can only really access it too by going to the basic mode in the Photo Pro app, which itself is kind of weird. You hit the button here to make it video mode, and then finally switch over to the front camera, and here it is. The front-facing camera can only do up to full HD resolution anyway, and honestly, it's just not a good performer. It pales in comparison to any of the other lenses. Hence, that's why you have the vlogging accessories and that little vlog screen, so you use the rear cameras for pretty much anything. Ultimately, in trying to make their smartphone provide an experience closer to a point-and-shoot camera, Sony actually did kind of succeed. You can go full manual, but everyday shooters might just end up hitting the auto modes for greater convenience. The hardware is actually a nice foot forward, but instead of trying to figure out computational photo and video capture like most other smartphones, they're basically telling users to figure it out for themselves, like they would on their regular cameras. Like I said before, I still think the quality is pretty good, but Sony always finds themselves in a comparison game with other competitors, and when you can get great vlogging results for less work on plenty of those other smartphones, it begs the question of who really needs the PRO-I. That's why I feel like it's the most Sony smartphone ever, because Sony has a habit of catering their products to their most hardcore fans and basically just having tunnel vision about it. And you know what? Brand loyal fans across any of Sony's various properties, they know the struggle. In order to get the very best experience of, let's say, PlayStation, Alpha, Bravia, and even Sony's own audio products, there's usually a little bit of complication to go through. Whether it's fairly closed ecosystems like in the PS5, hard to understand menu systems and alpha cameras, or let's say high prices for the best ANC enabled headphones out there, there's always something to deal with. And in the case of the Xperia Pro-I, I might have had the funnest and best smartphone vlogging experience in recent memory. But in order to get there, I have to deal with Sony's mixed bag of hardware choices, I have to use accessories, complicated interfaces, and of course, there is that astronomical asking price. Sony's getting better at what they're really setting out to do with the Xperia line. Inject as much from their other departments as they can into one smartphone. But at some point it just makes for an experience that can be fun, but is hard to recommend to people who just want something to balance its quality with ease of use. And I think for now, only those with a real Pro-I would actually be the people who enjoy the Xperia Pro-I. Sound off by hitting that like button and getting into the comment sections down below. With all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and we will see you in our next video.